Well, hello to our listeners and everyone watching. My name is Chancellor Makanjuola. I'm the social media ambassador for iHouse. And today we're here for our oral histories conversation with our special guest, former executive director of iHouse Berkeley, as well as the former U.S. ambassador to Zambia and Uganda, Martin Brennan. Welcome and hello, Martin.
Hello, Chancellor. Great to see you.
Great to
Thank
see
you for
you.
inviting me.
Thank you. Where are you coming to us from? Where are you tuning in from?
I'm in northeastern Italy, about an hour from Venice, in a small farm town called Santa Margherita d'Adige.
Oh, wow. And what brought you to Italy, actually?
My wife, I was an exchange student 50 years ago at the University of Padova, and we met there, and we've come back to Italy virtually every year. And so eventually we bought a small place in this village because it's near her family, and all my kids have Italian passports. So they love to come to Italy when they can. And it's good to be able to host them.
Yeah, so this is kind of like your second home, basically.
I would say so, yeah, it certainly is. We spent, of course, the entire pandemic in our second home thus far.
Yeah, and I was actually, that was my next question. I was gonna like, how have you been coping during the pandemic, and especially since you're in Italy, like early on, that was actually one of the hardest hit countries, and so you remained there during that time?
It's very, it's interesting what we did. Our kids had told us when we were saying, well, we want to go to Italy. We have tickets. We've got a lot to do there right now with the house. So let's go. And the kids, one of my children he has an MA in public health, and he said it's a very bad idea to go. It could be very dangerous traveling. And we said, well, our sense is that the pandemic is going to spread everywhere. So no matter where we are, it's going to be dicey. And we had a gut feeling that the US was not necessarily well placed to handle the pandemic. So we decided to continue and fly to Europe, and we got to Madrid. We arrived in Madrid on March 9, which was the morning after the Italian government declared lockdown.
Wow.
So we found that out and found out that our flight to Venice had been canceled, forever canceled. And so Iberia Airlines very kindly put us on a flight to Bologna, and one of our nephews picked us up there, brought us to the house, and we stayed here under very rigorous lockdown for the next 2 months. Then lockdown slowly lifted over time, and it lifted over time because it worked. Basically, if you were on the street and you didn't have a good reason to be there, then you had to pay a healthy fine. I mean, we're talking about 300 euros, 500 euros. And so people quickly learned that they had to obey lockdown. You only went shopping when you really had to buy groceries. 90% of all stores were closed. So yeah, but it worked. And for us, it was fine because Zoom became what everybody used.
Yeah, just like it is now as well. So is everything okay going for you now in terms of everything, at least better compared to where we are in the US, I'm sure?
Yeah, Italy has done really well. I mean, I'm not saying they're completely out of the woods. People are flocking to the beaches and to the mountains. We'll see what that means. But by and large, the numbers are much better than they were in January, February, March, April. They're just a fraction of those. So I'd say that so far, so good.
Well, that's good. Well, I hope you continue to stay safe where you are. Well, my next question is kind of going into your executive director role and like taking us back to iHouse. So you became executive director of iHouse in 2007, and then you left in 2012. And so I want to know what brought you to iHouse? How did you hear about the role? And what were your kind of impressions of iHouse coming in? What in terms of like your leadership, and how did that change by the time you left?
Good question. Well, I had gone to UC Berkeley and graduated as an undergrad in my senior year. So I knew of iHouse. In fact, I had come back from Italy for my one-year exchange program. And it was kind of late. I didn't plan too well. I got to Berkeley in August, about a week before classes started, and I looked around for a place to stay, and there weren't many. So I went to iHouse, and I said, hey, can I have a room? And they were very nice. They said, look, there's a waiting list a mile long. If something comes up, we'll call you. It may be possible because after all, you speak Italian, you speak some French, and you would really enjoy the experience. But it, excuse me, it didn't open up. And so I found another place on Piedmont Avenue. Sorry, no, on 2 blocks up from Piedmont. So I walked by iHouse every day. So I kind of knew about the place. And then I eventually entered the Foreign Service, long story short. And after 31 years, I had applied to go to be at the University of New Mexico as the diplomat in residence, which was a job where I'd be teaching and also discussing with interested people foreign service careers. And while I was doing that, I said, I've been in diplomacy for 31 years. Maybe it's time for a change. I'd like to be on a campus. I'd like to be with students. I like cross-cultural things. And then I saw that International House, the job had become available. It was I think it was in a Chronicle Higher Education. I think that's where I saw it. So I applied, and I guess the rest was history.
Awesome. And kind of going back to your role in foreign service. So you were the U.S. ambassador to Zambia as well as Uganda. And I read that you've done extensive travels. You worked in all parts of the African continent as well as in Europe and other parts. I believe it's also parts of Asia as well. And I kind of wanted to know, how did your role as U.S. ambassador as well as your extensive travels around the globe, how did that influence your leadership at iHouse, if at all?
Oh, I think it did, definitely. One of the things, I can look at it 2 ways. On the very positive side, I lived 22 years overseas, and you're exposed to a lot of stuff. A lot of things happen. You never know when you get up in the morning what the day will bring. So we went through a lot of coups d'etats, pandemics, unexpected riots, things of that nature. That was not unusual. Terrorism was far more common to us well before 2011. Sorry, 2001, excuse me. So we had pretty much been exposed to these things. When I showed up at iHouse for my interview, there used to be, as you probably know this, there used to be a significantly large oak and redwood forest right next to iHouse, right below the stadium. So I walk up, and the trees are full of tree sitters, and there's people with signs, and there's police around. And it was explained to me that the university wanted to cut down the trees to build a high performance student athletic center and to rebuild much of the stadium for earthquake reasons. So that was interesting. When I actually was given the job, they were all still in the trees. So they became a constant presence over the next 8 months or so. I forget how long it took. But during that period, iHouse was the closest place for the tree sitters and their supporters for restroom facilities, getting drinking water, buying coffee, getting sandwiches, a place in the shade. We had all of that. And so they became very frequent visitors to iHouse because we're open to the public. And during that period, the university put fences around the treed area and had security guards and put lights. So there was this cat and mouse game going on where the tree sitters would figure out ways to get down the trees without being seen and go into iHouse to use facilities. So at some point, the university there were court cases going on at the time. So as the court cases slowly wound their way through the system, the university became somewhat concerned because this was dragging on a long time And they really wanted to, they felt very strongly they were going to win the court case, which they eventually did. So they cut water supplies off for the tree sitters. The tree sitters all along Piedmont Avenue, no university building had water available from a tap, external tap. But we did. And I remember one of the leaders of the tree sitters said to me, could we use your water? And I said, well, yes, you can, because as far as I know, it just wouldn't be right to have people without access to water. And plus the fact we're not going to lock up our restrooms. So I got to know the tree sitters fairly well. And in fact, at a certain point, a third party, it was a former iHouse alum, asked if I would like to draw on my diplomatic experience and try to negotiate some kind of exit for the tree sitters and the university. So I thought about it and I drafted up what I thought might be a way to accomplish this. And I gave it to a vice chancellor at the university, but it went nowhere. The university didn't think this was a good time to start negotiations because they were convinced the court case would go their way, which it did. The tree sitter issue ended with helicopters flying over the trees, and eventually the police storming the area, and as soon as the tree sitters were removed, all the trees were cut within a week. So why do I tell you this story? One, because I thought it was kind of interesting having the tree sitters. I felt like, gee, my career just translated nicely into my old career into the new career. It seemed like similar types of unusual challenges. But 4 years later, there was the Occupy Berkeley movement. Maybe you heard of that. They were Occupy this, Occupy that, all over the United States. And they were occupying a part of campus. And then that got shut down. And so one Friday, my wife and I were heading off. And we were going up to Chico to visit friends. So we're driving up to Chico for about 2 hours north of Berkeley by then. And I received a phone call from Tim Lynch, head of our events office. And he said, hey, Martin, you're not going to like this. I said, what's up, Tim? Well, he said, I just talked to a fellow from the Occupy Berkeley movement, and they're going to occupy iHouse. And I said, what? And he said, yep, they're going to occupy iHouse. And I said, okay. I said, there's a way they can, we can find some middle ground on this. Tell them it wouldn't work for them to occupy iHouse anywhere inside the house, because that would get in the way of all the student activities. Plus, if they occupied the cafe patio, that would really be an obstruction of passageway. We have 545 residents going back and forth in that area. But I have no problem if they occupied the front lawn in that corner on Piedmont Avenue, which is part of iHouse. They can put their signs down there. They can do their occupying messages, and they get what they want. We get what we want. So Tim called me back about 15 minutes later. He said, hey, it works. It's a go. They're happy with that. I said, okay. Then about 10 p.m. that night, I received a phone call from Shirley Spiller, who was the business manager. And she said, Martin, things have gone south. The Occupy Berkeley people called the Occupy Oakland people and announced that they had occupied iHouse and invited them down to see. And I said, yeah. And she said, so at this moment, going down Telegraph Avenue, there are probably 300 or more Occupy Oakland people marching and police along with them, and they're heading to iHouse. So I said, well, it sounds like my brilliant solution didn't quite work.
Wow. So
I said, get the Berkeley campus police involved, and she did. And they came into iHouse. And then I called her back and said, how's it going? And you could hear the Occupy people out in front chanting. And she said, well, take a look. And she showed me with her phone. I said, yeah, it looks pretty busy out there. She said, yeah. She said, we have the police and their riot gear inside iHouse. And she said, and there are some members of the Occupy Oakland crowd, and not the Occupy Berkeley crowd, but the Occupy Oakland crowd, who at this point are talking about rushing into iHouse and taking over. I said, that doesn't sound too good. And I said, keep me posted. And I said, I'm going to head back from Chico, which was a 5-hour drive. So we hopped in the car, my wife and I, and started driving south. And by the time we got there around 4 a.m., it was quiet as a mouse. I called in the interim, and Shirley said, well, you know, she said, the Occupy crowd decided they were going to go and pay a visit on the chancellor. And I said, I bet he won't be too happy about that. And they never came back. And what happened was, Tim Lynch told me, he said, you know, Martin, remember when you were developing relationships with the tree sitters a few years ago? I said, yeah. And he said, well, one of the tree sitters, and he mentioned the guy's name, and I knew him. He said, at a certain point, when the crowd was trying to figure out what they wanted to do, he said, wait a minute. He said, this is iHouse. The executive director, Martin, he's a good guy, and iHouse is a really good place. They stand for good things. We're not going to trash iHouse. Let's go trash campus. So off they went. I presume the story's true. It was a hairy moment. It could have gone either way, but looking back, you know, in my diplomatic career, we were, part of the job was building relationships across barriers and trying to find ways to work together. So that was very useful. Now, the other side of it, because you asked a two-sided question, I think, the other side was, I came from a very different institution. The Department of State, U.S. Department of State, you know, it's got thousands of people. So I spent most of my time overseas at embassies, and embassies are like small Washington, D.C.s. You have a lot of departments represented inside the embassy. But if you need a backup for accounting or for security or for building repair or any number of things that would involve having more resources than you have at your hand at post or at the embassy, you can call on the State Department. You can call in Washington. They have a deep bench and they can send things out. At iHouse is pretty much a standalone operation. We had, I think at the time, 70 employees when I started, and we were financially independent. We paid our bills on time, and we had to remain independent because that's what the gift from the Rockefeller Foundation was about. This international house that was funded, the construction was funded by the Rockefeller Foundation, had to be financially independent, but part of the university. So we had to rely on our own resources, which meant if we ran into a large problem, we had to be very creative in how we resolved it. So I was used to having, you know, as an ambassador or even as an officer in the Foreign Service, just having people I could call on to work out problems. And I never really had to worry about administrative issues. That wasn't my forte. I was a political officer. I should have spent more time in the administrative cone. Of course, I had dealt with administrative issues as ambassador and as deputy chief of mission, but that was the kind of stuff that by the time it got to me, proposals were in place, there were solutions perhaps to work out, and I was the one to decide what we should do.
I also kind of wanted to get into the residents that were there, at least during your time too, because like part of being at iHouse is giving a chance for students to learn more about each other cultures, and kind of like just experience like new things. And hopefully like they can do that through learning about other people too. And so I kind of wanted to know during your time there, what are some things that you learned about the residents, any kind of cultural awakening that you had at iHouse? And yeah, just describe some of those experiences, any notable residents or notable alumni at the time that you remember.
Well, the residents, as Joe, I'm sure, told you, and Joe told me, and also Sherry Warwick, Joe's predecessor, had told me, they're the best part of iHouse. That's the reason we're there. Just spending time with the residents was always, without a doubt, just the most enjoyable and fruitful of my things I did. So what I would do was virtually every day, unless I had a business lunch I had to attend, I would go to a lunchroom and just sit at a table that I hadn't sat at before, as long as there were residents sitting there. Just introduce who I was if they didn't know me, ask who they were if I didn't know them. Usually it was the case I hadn't met them before, particularly early in the semester. And we just talk, and I would usually ask about, well, what do you study? And then without a doubt, they were studying stuff that was usually well beyond what I studied as an undergraduate.
So kind of like going into other things like related to students too are the activities that are at iHouse. So like, for example, the coffee hours, Sunday supper, end of the year galas that happened. So what were some of your, I guess, favorite iHouse activities that are in events that happened during your time?
Let me see. I eventually liked all the activities involving the students. And I say eventually because at first I felt that some of them had become a bit routine, a bit rote, which happens when you do the same thing over and over again. You change the group and do the same thing over again. It can become longer and longer. You keep adding things. And I felt that some of the events had become a bit long. And I could see students not particularly participating with any degree of intensity or leaving the room. So I decided about, I'd say about 2 years into my executive directorship, that it was very important for us to develop a firm sense of what we were trying to accomplish. And what I really wanted to do was to make sure that what we did wasn't exactly like we did the time before, that we studied it, kept the stuff that seemed to be working really well, and tried to develop things that could perhaps improve the product. And doing that, get that from talking to students, sitting down and talking to them. What did you like? What didn't you like? What would you like to see? And then trying to make sure that we didn't run over certain time limits, because then basically the students don't have enough time to absorb and they seem to enjoy it less. And we started doing that. What I added to that was when we began the cross-cultural programs, I wanted to find a way and worked at it, and I'm sure the house is still working at it because it has to be an ongoing effort to link all of our resources together. That means the students, student activities, all the activities, and the iHouse board of directors and the staff, to what we do somehow advances cross-cultural international leadership. The idea that we're a house about cross-cultural activities. We want our residents, we want our mission to be to give the residents that chance to develop this wonderful ability and the wonderful experience, which has always been the iHouse mission, the cross-cultural experience. So I focused a lot on that. But I should mention that when I came to iHouse, I did not come with the idea of changing everything. You know, I never believed in that. There's a lot of good things when you come, especially following Joe and Sherry. There was a lot of good things they'd done. And I had a lot to learn about what they had done and why they had done it. And then when I felt that I'd actually begun to understand something, I started making changes. And I remember a board member, my first month or so, he said, look, he said, I know some people think you should change things the first 100 days, but no, he said, it's gonna take you about a year to figure this place out. It took me longer, but anyway, I think I had a bit of hubris there. I could jump in and learn things quickly. But when I started understanding it better, I felt more confident about making changes. So I felt that we had to have much more feedback mechanisms with our students, and those were developed. Largely, Shanti Corrigan got very much involved in developing feedback mechanisms so we could get a lot of input from our residents on a regular basis. Shanti was the head of our development office, and that became important. But also just chill time, you know, over lunch or over coffee with residents was very important for me. Yeah.
Yeah, well, I'm kind of glad to hear your perspective too, because I was actually going to ask, like, in my question, like, what were some significant, like, policy changes or, like, that happened under your leadership? And I guess that kind of ties into it too, in terms of.
Yeah, I've got more on that You want?
Yeah, I actually kind of curious. No, we have time. This is why it's an oral history, kind of like getting a sense of, I want to like tap into your brain. Like, what was your leadership style like, and kind of how did you kind of transform the house like while you were there, too? So, in terms of changes in policy, what kind of happened?
Well, what happened? One thing that happened that I think was useful in the way that it added an incentive to move more quickly. I arrived in July of 2007, so within a year, the economy had crashed, tanked, crashed. It was pretty bad. We lost almost 50% of our endowment in one day. One day.
Wow.
I remember sitting with our finance committee. We're going over our endowment, and we just said, "Oh my gosh, we're in trouble." The positive impact of that was we had to be absolutely certain that we could stay financially afloat, keep all of our programs going, and not do so by jacking up the rates, because frankly, the students can afford it. Residents could not afford a raise in the rates, and nor should we have by any means charge them more. That meant we had to become more efficient in what we did. And also, I was very fortunate because we hired Shirley Spiller as business manager. This was perhaps about 7 months into my tenure. Shirley had corporate experience. She had an MA in business, and she had, I think, an undergraduate degree in business too. And she spoke German, and her parents were German. She'd been overseas a fair amount. So, and she was absolutely committed to the house and committed to, I think Shirley worked endless hours, and she had to because the house was in dire straits. First of all, we had to revamp the accounting system. I alluded to that earlier, but to revamp our accounting system meant to bring in entirely new software, because it had software that was, I think, almost 15 years old, I was told. It was prone to crash. It wasn't accurate. The record-keeping system was not up to par. Joe, one of the good things that Joe Lurie had done was shortly before he retired, he had brought in the first computerized residence management system. So the admissions office could manage the whole residence process on the computer instead of index cards or whatever.
That was very old-fashioned. Index cards. Well.
So, but when I got there, they were trying to tailor this high-powered, state-of-the-art residence program to our somewhat lacking capabilities. And that meant when you it's like trying to tailor a Lamborghini to a Fiat Cinquecento 500. A lot of stuff drops off, and that was tough. We finally got it right, but it took another year to get it right, a year and a half. But then we got to the point where we could actually not only do the bookings, do the bookkeeping, a lot of the admissions bookkeeping through this system. We could also start having repairs scheduled through it and all kinds of other things, which were an amazing change in how things were done. When I got to iHouse, I remember seeing long lines of residents in front of the window to pay their monthly fees or whatever, and long lines of residents to check in to get their meals, long lines here, long lines that. And I said, well, why is that? Well, first of all, you couldn't pay with a personal check. You couldn't pay with a credit card. There were all kinds of things that you couldn't do. So that meant it took forever to get payments. And so students had to go through all these processes. So Shirley and I, this was Shirley said, look, I'm going to make this happen. She said, we're going to go with Visa or MasterCard, and that's it. And we did. And that simplified things enormously for the students. It cost us some money. It cost us about almost 2% each time a student used the card. But it was, I think, 2% well spent because it made it so much better for the students and for the residents, and made it better for us. For the meals, we simplified that. We found ways to make that quick, so you just flashed your card and you went. That became very quick. What else did we do? My gosh. When it came to the orientation retreats, we found ways to just make that a more effective process, just register. To be at program events, it was easier. To sign up for Sunday supper, we made that easier. I decided that it's funny, I became more and more enamored with Sunday suppers as time went on, and began to really looking forward to them as a time to bring the house together and really in the spirit of iHouse, and use the Sunday supper. At the beginning, I thought it was a good time to use it to bring either board members or prominent outside alumni to speak, do the keynote talks at Sunday supper about things they'd done that were noteworthy, and they would perhaps talk a bit about what it was like when they were at iHouse, or students. Then the last 2 years, I said, you know what? It's good to inspire students, but I think it's more inspiring it's more effective if we try to inspire students by having students inspire students. So we would there was the second year I was there at iHouse, the Davis International Peace Fellowship Program started. It was run with the program office in conjunction with iHouse New York. And it allowed usually 2 or 3, sometimes 4 fellowships a year for iHouse residents. These are $10,000 fellowships to undertake and implement a project. It had to be a project that built peace. And I said, okay, let's, first of all, have iHouse students apply for these. Some would get selected, off they would go, they would come back. And then we would ask them to speak at the iHouse Sunday Supper to the residents about what they accomplished and what it meant for them, and to encourage the residents to go after it, in whatever walk of life they wanted to be in.
Well, yeah, it's good to see, like, when you're looking back and reflecting kind of like things that like you've learned about, like, I guess your leadership style and like the ways in which you kind of helped improve iHouse, at least for like the next executive director and then the next executive director coming after you. And so kind of my next question is, when you, like, by the time that you left iHouse in 2007, how would you describe that, the state of iHouse when transferring leadership over to Hans, the next executive director?
Oh, 2012.
Or 2012,
well,
sorry, yeah.
Well, the difference between 2007 and 2012 has to be addressed, I think, and then we'll go to what Hans received.
Yeah.
And anything I say is not meant in any way as a criticism of my predecessors, because iHouse continually requires change. It's an old building, and anything you change, any construction, is very expensive. When you have a 70-year-old, 80-year-old, now 90-year-old building, it is expensive to do anything there. And also because it has certain landmark qualities, you can't just put in new things. You have to be very careful what you put in. So we have a house committee, and the house committee is really the construction committee. And they met once a month. Their meetings lasted 3 to 4 hours. Professionals, these guys, some of them were board members, most of them were former board members. They were architects, contractors, owners of construction companies, artists, interior decorators. You get, these are very talented people, and they would spend these long meetings going over drawings, deciding about bids for construction, providing expertise. One of our long-term members of this committee was always very cautious about any changes that could in some way diminish the landmark properties of a house. So that was always difficult to deal with, I found, because it seemed like everything I wanted was going to diminish. So, and he was, but he was probably right. So first, I finally got the house committee to agree to replacing the furniture, not the home, yeah, in the home room. So they did that. It was very
so the
hard
room where I'm in, technically.
Yeah, you had to find just the right furniture. And then permission for the Great Hall to get that furniture, which was entirely shabby and looking terrible. And we got that replaced. And within a year, it looked entirely shabby again. But so we replaced it with better stuff. But the overall challenge was to get the house committee to agree to renovating the Great Hall, the home room, and the classrooms. They all looked their age. They were beautiful, but they weren't as beautiful as they should be. But what happened was, I think my third year there, one of our board members, Rick Dishka, owned properties. He was in real estate. He was on the House committee. He knew marketing, and he convinced first the House to redo the entire garden in the front. It looked like something out of a Tarzan movie, and it looked really uninviting. I mean, you expected also something out of Jurassic Park. You would have been surprised to see a dinosaur popping its head up. And we totally revamped it to something very beautiful, which made a difference. Then I think the other board members helped, but Rick was the one that talked about it. The need to make money available to upgrade the nicest parts of the house, parts of the house that in fact we rented out and that we used and we were very proud of because they were iconic. And so we got permission to repaint and do some design changes for both the Great Hall and the auditorium, that's right, and then of course for the homerooms. All three things got done. That took a tremendous amount of work. Fortunately, we had an interior designer on the board who did a lot of work on that, and we got it done. And what you see now, I believe, is what we had basically done. And it was an enormous change for the better. I was very proud of that because I used to just struggle to get that thing looking better. But the kitchen and the dining room, that had to wait till later. We just didn't have the money or time to do it. And it required, in order to get the food better, you needed to revamp the entire dining room. We were able to change the whole serving area, and that was wonderful. Shirley Spiller sat down with the serving staff, the whole kitchen staff, and they together redesigned within our limited budget at that time, the whole serving operation. And it made an enormous difference. It was just so much better. It was easier for them, certainly easier for the residents. Everybody had to wait less time in line. And it was just a great, I think, a moment of cooperation. But that was really a Band-Aid. Much more needed to be done. I never was able to get it done. I would have liked to have seen the full implementation of the intercultural exchange programs. You know, the focus, when I started thinking at a certain point of what can we do with the changes in the world had been changing enormously. The world of 2010, or 2009 in this case, was not at all like the world in 1927. What made I's House magic, the core thing of bringing students together, was still there. But there needed to be a bit more. I felt that we'd become a bit stale. We needed to, residents, I should say, were interested in learning skills. One of the things they liked was enhancing their cross-culture capabilities because the world was becoming so much more conjoined. There was so much interchange. And even though just having the internet, whatever the internet provides in terms of communication and social media, that's all fine, but it doesn't provide as much as iHouse can provide in terms of a deep intercultural experience, a life-changing experience. So we did two things. One, Helmut Meister was the head of our computer affairs office, which we had, I guess we call it what? I forget what we call his office, but Helmut was in charge of all the communication systems. And he was able to install internet, I think it was the year before I got there. And we upgraded it and made it better and better until it really was effective. I asked when I got there that we get, this was an earlier precursor to Zoom. Oh, jeez.
Who would have thought?
This was like, Jurassic Zoom. Mm. And we spent $13,000 on this thing, but it was a video camera and the ability using broadband to communicate with anybody else who had a similar system. So you can imagine it's pretty limited. But my idea was that we would get students, residents, having them do programs with iHouse residents around the world, do programs with other university students around the world, have programs with famous people, whatever, have that capability. They could stay in iHouse and talk to somebody else. We did a few of those. They were very hard to put together, but the one that was really a semi-success, but a good one, election night, 2008, yeah. There was a lot of excitement with Obama running, but the outcome, I'll never forget this. I was part of the dean's meetings, and they met, I guess it was once a month. We met I think it was once every week, I guess. The deans would meet, and they included me generously for a while. And so one of the senior poli-sci people said, "Mark my words, Obama's got this thing wrapped up." Right? That's the first I'd heard of this. I thought the election was really close. I didn't trust the polls at all. He said, "Nope, rest assured this is going to be a Democratic victory in a big one." And he was right. But anyway, we had arranged for this, for election night watch. And we'd arranged to have UC Berkeley in those days had a government, poli-sci government department person in Washington. And he ran programs there for students. He was well known. And so I contacted him. I didn't know the guy, but I said, "Hey, would you be willing to sit in and give your brief of the election, what you think, and answer questions from our students who are attending this program?" He goes, "Oh, sure, yeah." He said, it could be a long election night, so yeah, it'd be fun. And then we had one of our alumni was a student from University of Tokyo, I guess it was. I think it was, or Kyoto. And he arranged with his professors to have a similar group of students there to talk about their impressions of the US election with a professor of their poli-sci department, which I thought could be interesting. And then we had somebody else, Argentina somewhere. So we had this thing linked up around the world. And it started off really well. And the program was going with the professor in Washington. The crowd was excited, the residents were all excited, and people came in from the streets. So what happens? About halfway through the program, somebody in the crowd says, "Hey, CBS just announced Obama's going to be the winner." Everybody screams, starts dancing, and runs out to the street. And then like 5 people were left in the room. And then this party starts in the streets. All of Berkeley ended up in the streets.
This is not Bancroft Way, correct?
Yeah, it was just amazing. And so I'm thinking, well, it was a great concept, but I don't think it quite worked. Anyway, we tried that. We improved our communications. We improved our Sunday supper programs, as I mentioned before. We brought better speakers in for our other programs. In particular, for our annual iHouse dinners, the big fundraiser iHouse has. We had, Robert Reich came. Robert Reich, he was our former Secretary of Labor, probably one of the best we ever had. He teaches at the School of Public Policy. And he had then, he probably still has, the most popular class on campus. He had 8 teaching assistants, if I recall. How would I know this? Because when I asked him if he would be our keynote speaker, he said, "Well, yes, I will. I support iHouse. I believe in supporting iHouse. But," he said, on that night, I have my meeting, my after class meeting, because he gives this big lecture, with my teaching assistants. We meet over dinner and we go over what we're going to be doing over the week and points to be made in the breakout sessions with the students. So he said, "Here's what I'll do. I'll bring them all to International House if you can feed us all before I speak." And I, "Sure." So they took over the room you're sitting in, and they had a dinner there. And then, I don't know, 15 minutes before he was going to speak, he trundled on down, sat down with the chancellor and at the head table. Like, I was there too, I guess. And that was the year. This is a change too. I wanted to make iHouse more interesting for the residents. and for the staff, but also for the board. I felt that the board, there was this huge gap between the board and the residents in the iHouse experience. And I was looking at ways to deepen the iHouse experience, you know, for these donors and for our board members. So what happens? We have these these annual long dinners, long talks, and all these awards, which I didn't really enjoy. But I felt this was, you know, this was a third rail. I couldn't touch it. And then one of our board members, Jawahar Gidwani, who's a great speaker himself, came to one of our events. He pulled me aside and said, you know, Martin, it'd be great. It would be wonderful if we could just get something a little more exciting. Change the format. I'd be happy to work with you. So I said, gee, Jawahar, you're the first one to tell me that. So we did some sounding and found out there was support for this, and there was also some opposition. But I sat down with Shanti and I said, what do you think? And Shanti Corrigan said, let's go for it. So we sat down with a number of people, formed a committee, and decided to do an international house cocktail party before the talk by Robert Reich. And this was going to be an international event. So yeah, we decorated all the space available in the courtyard, any room that didn't have seats in it for the event. And we had, you know, international food offerings there. And Martha Hertelendi, who was, had been the vice chair of the board, is still on the board, and who wanted to keep the same format, didn't want to change it. But to her eternal, I think, to my eternal gratitude to her, actually, and she found a number of Peruvian restaurants that would come and provide the best food of the night. I'm not sure if we even had to pay for it. I don't think we did. And the evening was a huge success. The talk was great. Robert Reich was wonderful. Robert Reich was hilarious. But
Amazing. And I kind of wanted to just briefly touch back on something that you said. It's about a speaker series, or that you actually like taught. Was it you taught at iHouse, like a class or something, just to get?
Oh yeah, taught crisis diplomacy. It was all the courses that we taught there were UC Berkeley courses.
Oh, okay.
And this was under the auspices of Peace and Conflict Studies. So it was I think it was a 3 or 4 3-unit course.
Mm-hmm.
And
so you taught it at the university, not at iHouse.
No, I taught it at iHouse.
Oh, in which room?
In the one of the 2 side rooms, or the first one. No, actually no, both side rooms. Past you go next to the home room, those 2 rooms down the hall. Whatever they're called.
Yeah, and this was open to university students as well, or only iHouse students?
It was open to both, and we had about, I'd say, 40% of the group, maybe 50 were iHouse students, and the rest were campus people, some of whom had iHouse connections, which helped. But it was a good course. It was very lively, and what went best was I had a simulation course, 2 simulation sessions at the end. We always had small crises, so I would simulate certain things in the class. I went in the class to experience it. But the last 2 classes were 100% simulations. So it's all mapped out what the crisis was. It involved a lot of stuff you may have read in the newspaper at one time. But these are things that I had been directly involved in, so I could juice it up. And I played a role. I played a head of state. And everybody had a role. Everybody played the role of somebody, and they did this for 6-7 hours. And that, I think, was the high point. One of our board members, Egon von Kaschnitz, came in just to listen and participate. He was just mesmerized by that. It was fun to have him there. That worked. And so then we taught, but I realized, you know, I was happy that iHouse finally had a UC Berkeley course, because I felt that we should be part of the university as well as being a property on university property, a house on university property.
So that's something you implemented under your leadership, correct? Yeah, like having a course.
But it wasn't enough. It wasn't a good fit. I mean, everybody got something out of it, but for the time that I put into it, it was done on my own time. The link to iHouse wasn't strong enough, I felt. It wasn't close enough to what iHouse was about. So I thought about it, and that's when I came up with the idea. I thought, what is the, you know, why does iHouse exist? What is the core of iHouse? What are we trying to accomplish? And it's cross-cultural communication, cross-cultural understanding. So the key words are cross-cultural, international. And then I said, well, what have I learned coming here? I mean, after spending 31 years in cross-cultural environments. I said, well, I finally learned to listen. I've learned that the American way, I mean, I knew this to some extent, but I learned it much better at iHouse, that there are many more ways of looking at things and understanding things. And people, their gestures, there are many, how many things, signals I missed that would have improved my communication, my understanding of what was going on, and what people really expected and thought. So the culture stuff, those are things I hadn't picked up in all the years on my own. And there was so much in learning about cross-cultural education, cross-cultural things that I was, that I picked up, and it confirmed for me just how much more there is, how much there is to mine. And so iHouse can serve this purpose. Once we, the board more or less accepted that. Peter Robertson, who was vice chair of the board, vice chair means that the chancellor was our chair, but the chancellor was not often involved. The vice chair pretty much ran things. So Peter had also been number 2 at Chevron Corporation before. He was very committed to the house. And he came up one day, actually called, said, Martin, I've decided, and Chevron has approved, a $250,000 donation to International House for you to help develop your cross-cultural communication programs. We were at point zero then. That was a huge encouragement. And so I started working on it. I knew that there was some interest in this. And so the one summer, I guess it was the summer of 2009, I spent reading everything I could on cross-cultural communication, ordering books, reading books. It was, like mountains of books in my room. It was a disaster. Fortunately, my wife was in China teaching English, so I didn't have to move the books every day. But I came and I worked with Liliane Kozil, who was the director of the program office in those days. Liliane was from Madagascar, and she had tremendous insights on cross-culture, and she had a degree in them. So we put together a course, and we got, it was a UC Berkeley course, again, under Peace and Conflict Studies, 4 units. It was very popular. We were sold out, so to speak. I think we had 25 students, and that's all we could possibly fit in the room. We had the chairs in a big circle so everybody could see each other and talk.
Yeah.
And so it was a time of sharing. It was also, I used that program to bring board members in. And Joe Lurie knew some people in the tech world from India and other places who were to give their cross-cultural appreciations. And we had them come and speak too. So we had this kind of enrichment of the board, enrichment of the program, enrichment of us, of the students. And it was wonderful. It was a very popular class. The high point of the class was the first day of school, we asked everybody, well, why are you taking this class? And one student, she was obviously not happy about something. And when she opened up, she said, look, I just came back from India. I spent the last 2 months very stressed because I had what I thought was going to be a program for remote medical systems, where you'd have a hospital, would have communication with a village. We'd have people in that village and trained to be medics, basically, and they could take care of quite a few of the illnesses of the people. And there could be, online, immediate medical consultation if needed, so people wouldn't have to get into an ambulance and spend 5 hours going to the hospital, and they wouldn't have the money anyway. So she said it didn't work. So I got there and I just got shut down. All these promises they made, they treated me like I was a 5-year-old. Nobody listened. Eventually, I don't know what happened. They expected things of me that I didn't have. So we said, okay, we'll make your project our project. And we will try in the course of this semester to find out reasons and identify cultural reasons why what you thought was a done deal haven't worked. And we did. It took about, not too long actually, but she was a woman. She was young. She didn't have a degree. And she did bring a huge pile of money. So the hospital administrators said, why should we listen to her? What has she got for us? So we made some recommendations. You're going to have a degree next time you go, which she did. Go to people in the U.S. that give you clout, people that have clout. Tell them what you're trying to do. I'll write letters. Others will write letters on your behalf. Get letters from them to the hospital administrators, or have them write people in the area who have clout. Have basically people who are rooting for you from on high. Third of all, bring some pocket money. Have some of these people help develop give you $25,000 or whatever it is. Come with some money. Nobody mentioned this to you, but come with some money and this could help. She came back, I guess it was following summer, at the end of it, and said, you know what? It worked. It's up and running. Wow. It was marvelous.
It was great. Kind of just like hearing your experience, kind of like bringing in these programs, talking about like basically like the transformation, like both like the physical elements of it, and hopefully like people's perceptions and cultural understanding and learning how they've changed and like hopefully grew under your leadership and during your time there as executive director. And I kind of want to circle back to not circle back, but like kind of going into like iHouse where it is now, like iHouse in 2020, like the state of iHouse now, and unfortunately it has to close for the fall, due to the pandemic. And I kind of want to get your perspective, like what are your thoughts on iHouse closing, and where do you see the future of iHouse going from here?
Well, the closing of iHouse, I think, was a wise thing to do, because it's extremely tough on the house, extremely tough on the staff and residents, of course. I have to ask you about that. But the risk, I think, of the pandemic, which has gotten much worse, hitting iHouse was so high. I think it was probably wise not to keep it open. Also, since so many courses are going to be online at this point, I'm not sure how many students are going to need housing on campus. I don't know about that. But I do think the risk of the pandemic is so much out there, much more than anybody projected. Nobody has the perfect answer, but I think for this semester, the board did exactly the right thing. They're in a terrible position, I think, to have to do that. When I left iHouse, I remember I worked on a diagram and organizational chart that of how we could do the cross-cultural, how we could incorporate the cross-cultural training into iHouse, so it became an essential part of what the house did. And I advocated for establishing a center for cross-cultural leadership and training. I don't forget what I call it at this point, but that was the concept. And I think that's been established. I was checking up on that at the Peter Robertson Center. And that's a good thing. It's necessary, I think. But the house, during this period where the house its doors are not open, I think it'd be wise for the house to keep in touch as much as it can through Zoom, through messages on the internet, through Facebook. Keep that link alive with former residents, aspiring residents, past alumni, all of that kind of thing, just to keep that energy flowing, that the house is still out there. The real challenge, of course, would be opening the doors, making it all work again. For the future, eventually we're going to have the virus vaccine, and the vaccine for the virus, I think, will be what we need so they can open the doors again. However, my biggest fear of iHouse is that it become more of a dormitory than a cross-cultural center. It loses that magic of iHouse. It's been alive for all these decades, where the students, the residents, feel that they've been exposed to and benefited from something unique and something entirely beneficial. I mean, I did it my year as an exchange student. I had a version of iHouse, living in the dorm with Italian and other students. My roommate was Italian. But that didn't have the variety of iHouse. The iHouse variety is just so all-encompassing. And there's so much to learn. There are so many friendships to be made. So many things you learn about yourself, about how you can stretch and feel good about it, and never go back to how small you were before. iHouse gives you that. I'm not saying everybody gets that, but everybody is touched in some way by iHouse, and I certainly was. So my hope is that they're able to retain that. I don't know how the finances of iHouse are, nor should I, but my hope is that iHouse continues to thrive. It's a beautiful house, and it's in a beautiful position, and to the extent it can integrate itself into the university mindset as a wonderful place for cross-cultural understanding and leadership skills, that will give iHouse a special place on campus, which it deserves. That's my view. I've been away for 8 years. What do I know?
No. Oh, that actually is a pretty good segue. But right before I lead to my final question, what have you been up to since leaving? Since you're executive director? You're like, let me take a sip of water on that one.
About that. When I left iHouse, I decided that I wanted to do the things I've never been able to do, things that I just didn't have the time to do, or for when I was a diplomat, really shouldn't do. Which doesn't mean getting tossed in jail, but for example, I'd never been involved in political campaigns. So my wife had campaigned for Obama in 2008. She went to Virginia campaign, and she was on the Obama committee for the inauguration. She worked on that, volunteered. So when 2012 came and the election looked kind of chancy, I said to her, it's a waste to campaign for Obama in California. California's a done deal for Obama. Let's see if we can campaign somewhere else and do that. We do it for a couple months, just hang there for a long time. So I'd been at the University of New Mexico. I knew people there, and we knew we had a good friend who was part of the Obama campaign. And she got in touch with the Chicago folks, the campaign folks at Chicago headquarters, and said, hey, these people are available. They'd be happy to go to New Mexico, a swing state, because New Mexico, they really were a swing state in those days. And they will do whatever is required. There's no canvas, no phone, they'll just work themselves every day. And so the campaign found a family that would not only take both of us, but also our cat. And we became the best of friends. We still are. They've come to Italy 3 times. And we campaigned for the entire campaign. We did 8-10 hours a day, door to door, did voter mapping, you name it, we did it. And we loved it. It's a lot of work. And then when Obama won re-election, it was wonderful. So we kept that up. We kept campaigning up. For local elections and for national elections, always with the New Mexico base. Obviously this year it's not going to happen. I've been I wanted to come back to New Mexico and campaign again, but it's just not going to happen. We may be able to do something from afar, but I find that telephoning people is just not very popular. To show up at their door, they open the door and they listen to you. If you've developed a quick pitch, that's why no one's ever tried to shoot me. So I would have loved to do that again. It's a lot of work, but that's one thing. I love to volunteer. I can finally volunteer all I want. So I volunteer for a soup kitchen for street people, which I really love.
In the U.S. or in Italy?
In the U.S., downtown Albuquerque, when we're there. Italy has fewer volunteer activities. I'm not sure what it is, but it's not like in the U.S. So you just kind of look up, and you can find 50 places to volunteer. Not here. Here we focus, that's one of the things we do, is we focus on family, Giovanna's family. She's the youngest of 9. And so she has a lot of responsibilities to help take care of her elders. She's much younger than her brothers and sisters. So we spend a lot of time caring for them. And we've helped raise the nephews and nieces, which are quite a few of them.
Mhm.
So we help them when things aren't going well in the family. And that's good. That's a satisfying thing. Then I volunteer in a food bank, which I also enjoy a lot. That's in New Mexico. And we had other things we would do and get back, but right now we're here. We'll go back, but we're here for now. But when we go back, I'll resume those activities. And also, the soup kitchen also has an activity on the border, the U.S.-Mexico border, for people who come across and need housing, need food, need medical care. And so we'll get involved in that too.
Wow. Yeah, that's amazing to hear, and I hope you continue to have like a great time and feel fulfilled in what you're doing, and like just know that you'll always be like a very integral part of iHouse and like the way that it is, especially like when it's under your leadership, under all of those who have helped kind of like make iHouse what it is too, including the residents, the community. And so my final question, my last question is,
you can ask as many as you want.
I know. I mean, I'll leave it open to if you want to have like final thoughts too, if you even ask questions of me as well. But my final question to you is, what is your message, at least if you have one, to the iHouse Berkeley community too, especially with all that's been going on during this time. But yeah, if you have a message that you want to share to like current residents, the alumni community, what would it be?
iHouse cannot be recreated through Zoom, cannot be recreated through the internet. It can be enhanced through that, but you need a physical structure.
Yeah, again, thank you so much. These have been wonderful stories that you shared. I've learned so much about like the history, and I hope those who are watching or get a chance to listen to it learn too. So thank you, Martin.
Thank you. I apologize for going on and on and on.
Oh, no. That's why it's called an oral history, right? We don't want to like shorten it to like 30 minutes, then that's just like a mini interview. But yeah, we'll have it together. So thank you, Martin Brennan. He's our former executive director. Yeah, he's our former executive director.
Chancellor. Such a pleasure. Such a pleasure talking with you, Chancellor.
Yeah, such a pleasure.
The very best in your studies.
Thank you so much. Yeah, I'll close it out by saying thank you again. Yeah, Martin Brennan, former executive director of iHouse Berkeley, and always embedded, forever embedded in our iHouse Berkeley community. So once again, thank you so much for being here today.
Thank you.
Thank you.